Hey everybody, are you ready for bubble tea with a double D? I'm talking about Dungeons & Dragons, of course. My name is D from D&D Ditches, and today the D stands for downsizing. This is part 2 of my Planescape product showcase featuring the supplements, also known as flat books, which expands the setting, lore, monsters, and NPCs. I originally intended to cover all 12 Planescape supplements in a single video, but I'm starting to develop a bit of a scratchy throat and a cough, so I might be starting to get sick. And since I've already filmed the first 6 books, I thought, what the heck, I might as well break the showcase into 2 videos covering 6 books each and release what I've already filmed. The 12 Planescape supplements can be broken down into 4 sets of 3 books each, with each trilogy covering a similar theme. In this video, I will cover the Planescape Monstrous Compendiums Appendix 1, 2, and 3. And then the 3 books is what I'd like to call the Sigil trilogy, featuring In the Cage, A Guide to Sigil, the Factol's Manifesto, and Uncaged, Faces of Sigil. So enjoy! First up, we're going to take a look at the trilogy of Monstrous Compendiums for Planescape, Appendices 1, 2, and 3. Now, as we know, Dungeons & Dragons lives or dies by its variety of monsters. And of all the settings in D&D, Planescape has some of the most varied and exotic monsters. I wouldn't say that it's the most unique setting when it comes to monsters, because Planescape does include the entire multiverse. And in a sense, you can go anywhere in the multiverse, which means that you can potentially meet any monster from any setting. A lot of the planar monsters tend to be quite predictable though. I mean, what do you think that you will find from the elemental plane of fire or the abyss? These books do a good job at communicating the vastness of the planes, because it provides us with a lot of details about our favorite planar monsters, like your fiends and your celestials and your elementals, but then it goes beyond and give us really creative monsters and ones that we've never seen before, just to show us mere mortals that the planes are esoteric and mysterious and contains creatures that we've never seen before. Planescape setting artist Tony DiTerlizzi fully illustrated the first 2 appendices, but only contributed 4 pieces of artwork for Appendix 3 because it was released late towards Planescape's run, and Tony wanted to focus on other things at that time. Prior to Planescape, Tony made a name for himself by contributing to was the 2nd edition Monstrous Manual. Several pieces of his artwork in that book are still considered iconic fan favorites even till this day. Some of his most popular monsters were the Displacer Beast, the Mind Flayer, and the variety of other Fey creatures. In terms of release schedule, Appendix 1 was released in June 1994, that was 2 months after the initial box set. Appendix 2 was released in September 1995, which was after both Planes of Chaos and Lore, and 2 months before Planes of Conflict. And Appendix 3 was released in March 1998, which was 2 months prior to the adventure anthology Tales of the Infinite Staircase. As the last Planescape product was released in November 1998, Appendix 3 would be one of the last products released for the Planescape line, and fetches for an outrageous sum of money on eBay. Now let's go ahead and have a look at Appendix 1 first of all. I hope you watched part 1 of my Planescape showcase video. If you haven't, I'm going to link to that video. In that video, I mentioned prior to Planescape, AD&D 2nd edition released a Monstrous Compendium Outer Planes Appendix. It featured monsters from across the planes. Most of these monsters already existed in 1st edition, and the book served to update these monsters into 2nd edition stat blocks. So this book is not made of entirely original material. The blurb on the back says that this book replaces the original Outer Planes Appendix. So what it's done, it's taken the Outer Planes Appendix and further updated those monsters and integrated them into the Planescape setting. And what I mean by that is that most creatures' habitat, ecology, and culture were rewritten to better integrate them into the planes as how Planescape sees the multiverse. Almost every single plane that exists in Planescape already existed during the 1st edition era. The Planescape setting has gone in and reflavored everything and gave the planes a purpose. As in 1E, the planes were just places that you can go for high-level adventures. Planescape designers actually wanted to make the planes accessible for lower-level adventures, and then injected the planes with philosophy as to give it a reason to exist in the greater multiverse. So flipping through this book, the first thing that you might notice is that it does not have a table of contents. As the monstrous supplements included in the various Box sets were easy to use because it gave you a table of contents for all the monsters that are included, and all you have to do is flip through to the corresponding page. In this book, you don't even know what monsters or how many are included. And towards the back, they've provided a list of monsters by plane. At this point, this table is clearly outdated. I'll just give you a quick summary of the types of monsters that's included in here. We have, first of all, the Arsimon. So the Arsimon are celestials from the upper planes. Some of its more well-known names are Deva, Planetar, and Solar. So unlike the Archons that we previously looked at, which hails from Mount Celestia, the Arsimon can be found on any upper plane. A couple of these might be a little bit confusing. Frequency and organization are used by DMs to generate random encounter tables, and this is why sometimes you have very rare, common, and uncommon. A lot of DMs used a D100 random encounter table back in the day, and that gives you an idea of how to design your random encounter table, listing out the frequency of these monsters. Some of the other interesting things about 2e stat blocks is that you've got the diet, whether they're a herbivore, omnivore, or carnivore, and while it does not list the creature's stats like 5e, it does give you the intelligence, which a lot of DMs use for roleplay purposes. The bottom table gives you its combat stats. Hit dice means something different in 2e. It is essentially the equivalent to levels for monsters. So hit die 22 is equivalent to a level 22 character. And then you've also got its morale. In 2e rules, if certain conditions are met during combat, the monsters will need to do a morale check. Failing the morale check means that the monsters will try to run away. We also have the Animal Lords. This is the Cat Lord, and I believe Tony at some point said that this is one of his favorite illustrations. Note that Lord is a title, and is not gender specific. So in first edition, the Cat Lord was male, and the Cat Lord's write-up says that she recently inherited that role, and she is reasonably inexperienced. So Animal Lords are kind of like gods for that particular animal type. They do wield a lot of godlike power, but they are not immortal like a god. And that's part of the reason she took over from the previous Cat Lord. Then we have Beatezu, also known as devils, and we have multiple types. Now I know a lot of D&D players do not like words like Beatezu and Tanari. They were created for 2e as a response to the Satanic Panic, and wanted to distance themselves from devils and demons. So Planescape expands on their lore by saying that Beatezu is the name that they call themselves, and this is the true name for their race, whereas the mortals from the Prime Material world, also called Primes, also called the Clueless, gave them a made-up name, Devil. And that's the lore reason why Planescape does not use the words like devil and demons. Now, whether you prefer Beatezu or Devil is up to you. I think both names are valid, it's just more of a preference. But for me, I do love the fact that they have a true name for their own race. It's like Mind Flayers are also referred to as Alithids, which is the true name for their race. And another reason that I like Beatezu and Tanari is that players frequently get demons and devils mixed up. I know in real life those terms are kind of interchangeable, but in D&D they're very, very different creatures. And by calling a devil a demon or a demon a devil is going to be a very quick way to start rolling your death saves. I know some of my players watching this video is probably going to feel very attacked right about now, and I'll probably get a message on my phone in a few minutes. So further to the devil and demon debacle, we have the Bebelith, which is from the Abyss. Now, even though it's from the Abyss, it is not a Tanari. And the additional nuance to those names is that all Tanari are demons, but not all demons are Tanari. And the same with Beatezu and devils. So this is an additional nuance to using the names Tanari and Beatezu. We also have Githyanki and the Githzerai. At this point, the Githzerai is already a playable race, but it's not for another couple of years before the Githyanki will be playable. The Marut might be a monster that you've never heard of until now. They typically serve the powers of the upper planes. I kind of think of them like a planar deck collector. They follow their mission to the letter and they will chase you to the end of the multiverse. We also have a variety of methods. And the Slad. And Sladi is used to refer to multiple Slad. I really like the Planescape design for the Slard, and they're some of my favorite monsters because they're more frog or toad-like. It's important to remember that Slardy are not evil. They can be violent, but that's usually because they're hungry, but they can be reasoned with. I don't particularly like the 5e depiction of the Slardy. They turned them more into reptilian creatures. They kind of look like hunters from the Resident Evil games, whereas I feel like the Planescape design has an air of innocence to them. Most of them are fairly simple creatures, as you can see that their intelligence is low, and they act mostly on instinct. And then we have the Tanari and Yugoloth and some of the other fiends. This book should contain most of your favorite planar creatures, so between this book and the monstrous supplement from the base box, you should have enough monsters to run about 80% of your encounters. But these books are not formatted very well because there's no table of contents and you've got monsters spread between the 3 appendices, plus however many supplements from the box sets, plus other material from modules and whatever. You're going to have monster stat blocks everywhere and not having a good way to keep track of it. So what I do, and if you're really thinking of getting into Planescape, what I recommend that you do is to purchase the PDFs for all of these books and extract all of the monsters from each of the books, supplements and modules, and then create a new document and put all the monsters in alphabetical order. I've done that a few years ago, and I find that it's a much easier way for me to manage the monsters. As you can see, I'm about to lose daylight, so I'm going to end this part right here. Tomorrow, I will go through Appendix 2 and 3, which will be the next part of the video. Next up, let's have a look at Appendix 2, and just like Appendix 1, it did not come with a table of contents. So the same complaints as I had for the first book, there's no easy way to look at what monsters or what creatures are contained in this book. However, this does give you the encounter tables, which includes all of the planar monsters that has been released until now, which includes all of the monsters from Appendix 1 as well as the supplements from the planar boxes that has been released since then. And you can see that this is a 2d10 table. So if you wanted to run random encounters for a specific plane, let's say if I was in Arcadia and I wanted to run random encounters, I can use this table to facilitate that. If you want to still run a 2e Planescape game, because Appendix 3 pretty much only contains monsters from the inner planes and the elemental planes, so therefore for outer planes, this still be reasonably current. Nowadays though, if I was to run random encounters in a specific plane, because there's been so many other monsters that's been introduced in 3e and 5e, I would probably need to curate that myself, just because there are some good monsters that was invented back in subsequent editions, such as the Hellfire engine, as well as the Lilitu Tanari, which were both introduced in 3e. We have the debut of the Asima. So similar to Tiefling, Asima is the upper planar cousin to the Tieflings, also introduced in Planescape, but it's not until the Planewalker's Handbook, a later release, where they became a player race. We also have some additional monsters which already exist in D&D canon at the time, which has been updated, such as the Arcane, which came from the Planescape setting, and we also have the Astral Dreadnought. Anybody who has seen the cover of the original Manual for Planes, that featured the Astral Dreadnought. In terms of content though, I would say that Appendix 1 would be mandatory to run a Planescape game, whereas Appendix 2, not so much. A lot of the monsters and creatures that gets introduced didn't really make much of an impact. However, I would say that the biggest contribution of Appendix 2 is its contribution toward the Planescape lore, because it actually expanded a lot of the outer planes. And as an example, I will talk about the Eladrin. The concept of planar creatures is that each plane
would have a race of creatures which originates from that plane. So for example, the Nine Hells of Beator has the Beatizu, the devils, and the Abyss has the Tenari, or demons. And then we have the Modrons from Mechanus, the Slat from Limbo, the Archons from Mount Celestia, so on and so forth. That's some of the most famous planar monsters, but it leaves certain planes without its own unique race of creatures. This is what Appendix 2 has done really well in. This was the debut of the Eladrin. In subsequent editions, the Eladrin has had its lore changed to better fit that edition. For example, for 5e, I believe that they originate from the Feywild. However, back in 2e, the Eladrin was the chaotic good-aligned celestial hailing from Arborea. We've looked at the Planes of Lore box set. The box set did not mention anything about the Eladrins when it came to Arborea, so this is actually lore that was written subsequent to those box sets. We have two other planar species that's similarly introduced in this book. We have the Cardinals, which are the neutral good aligned celestial hailing from Elysium. All of them are based on a certain type of animal. For example, the bear-like Ursinal. And then we also have the Romani, which is the neutral aligned people of the Outlands. None of these species of creatures were mentioned in its corresponding book set, so we can consider this as expanding the lore of those planes, and some of those planes really needed additional content. The other thing that this book is really good at expanding the lore was that it introduced additional planar sects. For example, we have the Mercant, the Incantifier, and a few more. Some of these sects were actually factions from age old, which were part of the histories in Sigil, and some of the previous products has actually made allusions to some of these factions or sects, but they have since been ushered out of Sigil. This book essentially gives you the lore about the history, about where they are now and what their beliefs are, and it would also give you a small section on how to treat a player character wanting to become a part of this sect. It's really good at giving you additional ideas and hooks on where to take your story and your adventure. You could actually include these sects in your story. So while the monsters in this book would not appear as much as Appendix 1, I do think that this is a great book, giving ideas on how to expand your game. And finally, we have Appendix 3, which was released towards the end of the product line. And unlike Appendix 1 or 2, which were illustrated by Tony DiTerlizzi, most of the monsters in this book were done by Brian Despain, with Tony only providing, I think, 4 illustrations in this entire book. And just like the other books, we don't have a table of contents, but what we do have though, and this is pretty good, is an index towards the end, which details all of the planar monsters that has been released. You can see their name and which book it appears in, and these are all of the books. And what's noteworthy is that it does not include only the Planescape product. So you've actually got some monsters which is from Dark Sun, Alkadim, so on and so forth. This would be a handy way if you wanted to get the stat blocks on a particular monster but you don't know which book it's from. This is a good reference guide. The niche of this book is that it details mostly monsters from the inner planes or the elemental planes. Given this book is released quite late in the product line, it is quite rare because I don't think that many of them were actually printed. However, if you don't have access to this book, I don't think it matters that much in the overall scope of Planescape, given most games that I know, and including my games, don't actually take place in the inner planes. I would say most of these monsters are not seen again. A lot of these creatures did not make much of an impact on D&D in subsequent editions either. So I would say if you really wanted to run your campaign in the elemental planes, in the inner planes, including the ethereal plane, then you might want to get this book to improve the variety of the encounters. This is one of the very few pieces of artwork that Dita Lisi has contributed towards this book. And we also have another one here, but there are only about 3 or 4 art pieces in this book. Whereas the remaining art is just okay. I mean, gives you an idea what the monster looks like, but I would say it's not on the same caliber as Dita Lisi's artwork. Next up, let's take a look at the 3 books that I would like to consider as the Sigil trilogy. I call it that because these books expand on Sigil, the City of Doors, in different ways. Prior to this point, we already had the Planes of Chaos and the Planes of Lore box sets. The Planescape designers created Sigil to be the hub city in this setting. The City of Doors holds portals to every plane in the multiverse, whether this would be an inner plane, an outer plane, or the prime material plane. It really is the nexus of the multiverse, and most adventures either start or end in Sigil. The first book in the Cage, A Guide to Sigil, was released in May 1995. This book is presented as a literal guide to the 6 worlds of Sigil, and provides a plethora of interesting places to visit, the landmarks of the city, quirky sites and locales with the associated NPCs. The Factol's Manifesto was published just a month later in June 1995, and is presented as an in-universe guide to the 15 factions of Sigil. If you know a little bit about Planescape, you would know that the factions play a big part in the city. Apart from spreading their beliefs and philosophies, each faction also do their part in the daily operations of the city, its government, or provides the city with a service. And for the last book, Uncaged Faces of Sigil, this was released in March 1996. This book introduces over 40 NPCs to the city of Sigil. Some of these NPCs, such as Kylie, was introduced previously through Dungeon magazines and other publications, but a lot of these NPCs are new. They all come with personalities, agendas. Some of them will have a stake in the affairs of the factions or politics of the city. Some of them are more interested in what's going on in the rest of the multiverse. So really, this trilogy of books can be divided into places, organizations, and people. However, when these books are used together, the combined effect is greater than the sum of its parts. You'll see recurring NPCs or characters, some recurring storyline and plot hooks, and with these 2 books in particular, they often cross-reference each other, and it is through reading both of these books that you get the full scope of some of the stories being told. So let's take a closer look at In the Cage first of all. So In the Cage is 128 pages, and contained within And remember my previous video where I mentioned that the map of Sigil would go on to get updated a couple more times? Well, this is one of them. It places the sites and the buildings introduced in this book on the map, which previously pretty much only contained the faction headquarters. However, the choice of colors is not great and is very difficult to read. If you're after a detailed map of Sigil, there is a fan-made version that is far superior to any map released with any official publication. I've printed it out and I hung it on my wall. If you do a quick Google search on maps of Sigil, you'll probably be able to find it. So this is the table of contents. It starts off talking about why the city is the way that it is, regarding the architecture and the wildlife. Now, nothing grows in Sigil except for razor vine, which is a vine that can grow 6 feet a day and has sharp thorns on them like bramble. And why is the city skyline full of blades and spikes? Well, this section explains it. Sigil's full of pigeons and the executioner raven, which likes to eat carrion and roost on the rooftops. So the spikes and blades serve as a deterrent. This shows where the portals are in the city and where they lead. Obviously, they can be expanded upon. And then it goes on to talk about the amenities of the city, such as light boys and sedan chairs. And then it moves into the different wards of the city. Notably, Tony Dita Lisi did not do the artwork in this book. However, I would say the artist has captured the essence of Planescape, so the artwork is pretty good. Now, something that I really enjoyed about this book is that a lot of the places and the businesses being featured contain in-universe propaganda and advertising. For example, the Fortune's Wheel, this is the same Fortune's Wheel as the 5e adventure by the way, contains a copy of the menu. I like to print out these and hand them out during the session to my players because I play in person, and use it like a prop. So when the players go to a tavern and instead of just making up some on-the-spot food or drink, you can give them the menu and then they can order from it. It really helps to sell the fantasy of these establishments. Now, I just talked about stories being started in this book and then gets elaborated upon in Uncaged. The Temple of the Abyss is one of these. It describes a creepy temple in the Ladies' Ward dedicated to the Abyss, and people are able to sell their souls to the Abyss. You can also bargain with them for certain favors. However, the Abyss always wins, and you better be ready when the Abyss comes to collect. This is another in-universe item that you can add to your game. It's a promotional flyer created by one of the NPCs that's in Uncaged. This is a clue that's part of a puzzle for one of the places featured earlier on the book. You can incorporate all of that into your game, and suddenly one of the handouts that you use for world building has a secondary purpose. A lot of the places introduced in this book are quite fun and quirky, and is still part of the city in 5e. This is a very dark sun looking piece of artwork. But the main idea of this book is just to give you ideas on places that you can incorporate into your game. I've included Alicia's Pantry in my game. She even came with her own theme song. I've also included the Bottle and Jug. It is a tavern with an illegal underground fighting pit. I recently added a player to my game of Tales of the Infinite Staircase, and he wanted to be a pit fighter. So I said to him, okay, your character fights at the Bottle and Jug. And I sent him this picture and I said, this Cyclops named Akra, he's your arch nemesis and he's been making your life hell. And that was his backstory. So overall, a really good book. Next up, let's have a look at the Factol's Manifesto. This book details all 15 factions of Sigil. It is 160 pages long, so it is actually a fairly good size and contains quite a bit of information. So the word Factol refers to the leader of the faction, and a faction is an organization where its members, meaning the people, are united by a single faction belief. I think of the factions in Sigil as if it were part religious organization because this is where the belief and philosophy part comes in, part political party because some of them have a political agenda that they want to push, and part government or service provider. As while the Lady of Pain governs the city of Sigil, she's also a hands-off kind of gal. She doesn't get involved until that burning pile of crap is about to hit the fan. So the government and the management of daily operations of the city are left to the factions. How well do they manage that, you ask? Dysfunctionally, of course, as each faction carves out their slice of the city, and each of them make a city landmark as their faction headquarters. It also comes with a single-sided poster, which I'll put on the screen for you. So the poster shows the 15 factions. The factions that have a factol has the factol depicted. The two factions that don't have factols are the Free League and the Revolutionary League. The poster also contains a quote by one of its leaders, denoting its faction's philosophy. Now, this copy of the book that I have is sealed, so I won't open it for this video. I will wait until I make its own video. So you see the pink ribbon wrapped around the book. I thought this was a ribbon that you could remove, but it turns out this is an actual sticker. And this also explains why I hardly ever see this book with the ribbon on eBay, because it seems like this is one of those stickers where once removed, you're not able to reattach it. So I would imagine any copies that you see with this sticker will be a sealed copy. So the ribbon says banned in Sigil. And the book, the Factol's Manifesto, is an in-universe book, part of Planescape's canon and lore. And the actual book in the canon was also banned in the city of Sigil. So I love the presentation because this is presented as if this is the book in canon. At the start of this segment, I mentioned that the Sigil trilogy of books make references to each other. Well, the editor of the Factol's Manifesto is an NPC established in the Planescape canon. And this NPC also gets a write-up in the Uncaged book, which is coming up. Who is it? I'm not going to give away the surprise. Part of this book is written from the perspective of the editor in the first person, and we also get excerpts from some of their collaborators on how they obtain the information, which is set to uncover each of the factions' darkest secrets. And it is through these transcripts that we get some hint on the identity of the editor. So while I'm not going to open up this copy, I do have a digital copy of this book. So we can give it a scroll through and see what's contained in here. So this covers all 15 of its factions in alphabetical order. So first up is Aether. Their beliefs are similar to someone who's more of an atheist or an agnostic. So you say, hey Ditch, I thought the outer planes are full of gods. Well, they are, but the Aether don't think of them as true gods, because their argument is, if they're true gods and they're so powerful, why do they need worshippers? In the astral plane lies the corpses of dead gods. These are the forgotten gods who have lost all of their worshippers. They lose all of their power. Their bodies float in the astral plane, and Githyanki builds fortresses on them. So each faction is given an introduction. Often the introduction is written from the perspective of the Factol or someone related to the faction. I just realized I could probably move the tablet closer. Here we go. And then we get history of the faction. How did the faction come to be? There's new artwork provided for the faction headquarters. So in the case of the Aether, that's the Shattered Temple. And then we get the stat block of the Factol, along with their history and how they become Factol. Followed by that is a description of the faction headquarters. We're given not just new artwork, but also a layout of the headquarters. And then each faction is introduced to 2 or 3 more NPCs and their backstory. The idea is that while all the faction members share the same core faction belief, each of them interprets it differently in their own way. Just like real life religious or political organizations, you can have your moderates and your extremists. And it's good inspiration for the DM to use to roleplay the faction NPCs. And then it describes the membership process, what's required for PCs if they want to join a faction, along with its faction abilities and restrictions. Don't forget that on the planes, belief shapes reality, and belief is power. It's not the PC's faction membership that gives them the power, it's whether they actually believe in it. So a PC could go through the process to join a faction. However, I would always ask my player, does your character actually believe in the faction philosophy? If they say yes, great. You get all of the faction benefits. If they don't, the faction could still pay them lip service and say, hey, yeah, now you're one of us, but I would not give the player any of its benefits. And likewise, if the players choose to break the faction restrictions or act in a way where it doesn't align with their faction beliefs, I will question them. If they do it too many times or too consistently, the next time that they go to use their faction ability, I would say to them, you try, but it doesn't work anymore. Thankfully, I haven't had to use that yet. So the chat goes through current affairs and what's happening with the faction at the moment. And then you've got the DM's Dark. So the Dark is planar cant, and it refers to a secret. I've not talked about the planar cant so far in my videos because to me it's not really that important. But the Planescape products written in this planar cant, which is like a slang. The planar cant is essentially a slang used in Sigil and takes inspiration from the English slang from, say, the last 300 or so years. The chant is like saying the gossip, the news. Jink refers to gold or currency. And then you've also got the word that gets thrown around a lot, burk. So a burk is a derogatory way to refer to somebody like an idiot or a fool. So some players really hate the cant. I actually quite like it, but I find it a bit difficult to incorporate it into NPC speech when I'm playing the NPC, because I'm like, hey, I'm already trying to think about what the NPC's response is on the spot and having to translate that into the cant as well. As much as I would like to, I don't really use much of the cant. So this section provides you with a few of the faction's secrets, or what they're trying to achieve, their agenda, and they're really good plot hooks to include in your game if your players are really getting involved with the factions. If you're playing a political campaign set in Sigil, you can really use it to build a lot of the intrigue, the faction rivalries, the alliances, the secret deals that are being made. You can even keep the player in the dark for most of it. Say the Factol has a request for them to do a certain thing, but don't actually tell them the real purpose for this, so that when they eventually find out the real purpose, you can really set up for some big jaw-dropping moments. All of the Factols also gets new artwork. This is the Factol of the Believers of the Source, Ambar Vergrove. One more thing that I will say before we move on is that it does assume that time has moved forward by a couple of years since the base box. And since then, one of the Factols for one of the factions has been replaced. So you do get a sense that the city itself is alive and that things are happening whether you're involved or not. So that's all we're going to go through for this book for now. And the final book of this trilogy is Uncaged, Faces of Sigil. This book is 128 pages. It does not come with any posters though, just the book itself. And here's the table of contents. You can see that this book provides you with over 40 NPCs in the city of Sigil. You might prefer to make your own NPCs, and that's totally fine. However, the NPCs introduced in this book are really high quality. And each of these NPCs relates to several of the other NPCs in this book in some other way. So you can include NPCs that has its history, personality, social and power dynamics already been established. First up, we have Aiken, the friendly fiend. He is an Arcanoloth, and he has a shop in the lower ward, and he's also one of my favorite NPCs. We also have Autocon the Bellringer. Remember when we looked at In the Cage and I said that the story for Temple of the Abyss will be continued in this book? Well, this is the NPC that I'm talking about. He reneged on a deal that he made and he was suffering the consequences. But then he was able to find an ally that's also included in this book. And now that he owes this ally a favor, the ally is now getting him to do all of their dirty work. Although a lot of the time he's just been asked to keep an eye out on a third NPC, which has a secret tie to the ally. So that story gives you an example of how the NPCs in this book are related to each other. So each NPC is given a piece of artwork and between 2 to 4 pages devoted to them. On the sidebar, you have the quick information on the NPC, including its stat blocks. You're given 3 words to describe their personality. For example, Black Marion is theatrical, alluring, and kind. You're also given some additional pointers on how to roleplay this character, such as their disposition, any likes or dislikes, or if they have any hidden agendas. When we looked at the first book in this trilogy, In the Cage, that's the book which detailed the places to go in Sigil, but it also contained NPCs related to these places. So in this book, the opposite is also true. This is a book about NPCs, but you're also getting introduced to places as well through these NPCs. For example, Kesto Bright Eyes owns a bookstore called The Parted Veil in the lower ward. So you're getting introduced to the NPC as well as the store that they work at. I love this piece of artwork as it shows Kesto as well as his assistant called Sir Cleve. You might be asking, is Kesto feeding Sir Cleve? He's all skin and bones. Well, Sir Cleve is a Bodak. Bodaks are from the Abyss and they have a death gaze ability, but Sir Cleve is lawful good. So the story goes that Sir Cleve used to be a paladin, and he met his end fighting demons in the Abyss. However, his resolve was so strong that even when he was risen as an undead, he still retained his free will and his sense of righteousness. And then he met Kesto, who took him in, and he's now his assistant. Here's another quirky thing about the character design. In some of this Planescape art, you will actually see NPCs that has candles on their head. I saw that a while ago. Some fan tweeted Tony and asked them why he drew NPCs with candles on their heads. And Tony's response was, well, I just thought it was cool at the time. And I've taken that idea and placed it in my game. We also have Harris Hatches, the marketing extraordinaire. He's the one that made a lot of the flyers from In the Cage. We have Kylie. She is a tout. A tout is essentially a guide to the city. Shemeshka. She is one of the characters in the Planescape 5e adventure. And by the way, she's the one that's in the mirror. She's also an Arcanoloth. Tripicus, the Ursinal. And towards the end, we also have some less noteworthy NPCs that has a couple of paragraphs written for them. And then we're giving a few of these flowcharts on how the characters relate to each other. And with this book, you can pull out entire character trees and plop them into your campaign. Write a few hooks that links them together, and bam, you've got a game.
Hey, thanks for watching. Give me a thumb up and don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss out on the next part. And let me know in the comments what else you'd like to see. I hope that we get to hang out again in my next video.